thank you all for joining us. So, many of you here might have already heard for the past few years from many reliable media sources that the Chinese Communist Party has been um, weighing war against the Muslim communities in China um, in uh, as like their way of fighting against terrorism. Uh, Obviously, their alleged reasons are complete made up and have been used as an excuse to oppress against Muslim minorities across the country. Many reliable sources have reported instances where re-education camps have been set up to try to take the Uyghurs and many other Muslim communities' culture away from them. And many people have been forced into doing forced labor, and uh, many security measures have been set up in the Western region to keep track of many of the Uyghur people as a mean to oppress them. So joining us today, we have Dr. Darren Byler and Rahima uh, Rahmad. And sorry, I think I already butchered her name. Anyway, so Darren is a postdoctoral researcher at the Center of Asian Studies at the University of Colorado Boulder. And Rahima is a Uyghur singer, human rights activist, and also a well-acclaimed translator and consultant for many documentaries regarding the Uyghur issue in China. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand this over to Dr. Darren Byler.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and all of you for coming. I'll talk for around 20 minutes or so, kind of going through some of my research. And then Rahima will talk for a bit, and then we'll open it up for questions. What I'm going to talk about is the digital enclosure of Uyghur and Kazakh Muslim societies, really looking at how surveillance systems have begun to control people's lives, both outside of the camps and in the camps, and also the role of the sort of low-level workers in these surveillance systems. But to really understand how these things came to be and how the camp system was built, or why the Chinese government decided to do it, we need to go back to the 1990s, which is when there was a large-scale migration of Han people, which is the majority group in China, around 1.3 billion people, 90% of the population. Large numbers of those people began to move to the Uyghur region, which is up in northwest China. In the 1990s, China was becoming a manufacturer for the world. It was really turning to a market economy. Prior to this, it had been a communist state, and now it was becoming a capitalist one. And so in order to really fuel and drive that economy, they needed raw materials. And so many people from other parts of China began to arrive in the Xinjiang region, the Uyghur Autonomous Region, also known as East Turkestan. And they began really for the first time to enter the Uyghur majority areas, which are in the southern part of this region. So the Kazakh homeland is in the north, and the Uyghur region is in the south, and there's a really tall mountain range in between. And then the city of Urumqi, which is the capital here, is sort of a bridge in a valley between these two parts of the region. Prior to the 1990s, Uyghurs had lived pretty autonomously in the southern region, in these oasis cities that you see marked on the map here. In many of those areas, Uyghurs were 99% of the population. Most people growing up in those spaces didn't see Han people on a regular basis or much at all. Some of the people I've interviewed told me that in the 90s, if you saw a Han person like in your town or in your village, like it was an event. Everyone would come out and look at the person because it was like, look, there's a a kind of foreign person, a Chinese person, a Han person in our presence. They Uyghurs knew that this region was claimed by China, but they thought of themselves as living in a Uyghur world. Everything happened in Uyghur language. Uyghurs were in charge of all of the institutions for the most part, even though the government, would control the political system. The education system, for instance, was almost fully Uyghur. That began to change in the 90s as these people moved into the South and started to build out the hard infrastructure, the pipelines and the roads and all of those things that were necessary to extract the natural resources. The Uyghur region is home to close to 20% of Chinese oil and natural gas, and it has now become the source of around 84% of Chinese cotton, which is close to 20% of the world's cotton. And so you can see that this area is quite lucrative in terms of the resources that are there. Unfortunately, what's happened since the 1990s is most of those resources have gone to the rest of the country and to the settler population, the people that came to build the infrastructure. And so Uyghurs have seen themselves pushed off of their land in many ways. They've seen the cost of living begin to rise, but they've not been able to find good jobs in the new market economy for the most part, because there's so much discrimination against them. That also this transformation also began to affect the institutions that govern social life. So in the schools, the Uyghur teachers eventually were pushed from teaching positions to sort of janitorial positions and were replaced by the settlers. In the banks, the loan officers, the people that could actually give people money, were replaced by the Han settler population. And this happened over time. It didn't happen immediately in the 90s and 2000s, but today that's the current circumstance that you'll find in many locations in southern Xinjiang. All of this had a strong effect on the Uyghur population, especially among the younger generation. Many people felt like the only way that they could have a better future was if they left the rural areas and went to urban locations. And so farmers started to go from the villages to the local centers like Khotan or Kashgar. And then in the 2010s, they started to move in larger numbers to the city. And I did my research beginning in 2011 in Urumqi, where I was seeing a lot of these people come to the city. Some of that migration was incentivized or organized in some way by technology, because in 2010, for the first time, Uyghurs were able to get online in large numbers using 3G networks. This was, it really sort of revolutionized, like, especially young people's lives. For the first time in 2010 and 11, people could get a smartphone really cheaply. They could, even from their villages. And so in 2011, when I did my first year of field work, I was meeting all of these Uyghur young people who were buying smartphones and were talking about smartphones all the time. They were also using a new app called WeChat, which was something that replaced apps that had been banned in China, like Facebook and Twitter. It allowed Uyghurs to use the spoken, the oral communication function of the device and of their phones to communicate in short messages with each other. And that really opened up or made it more accessible for people that had lower sort of training in how to use computer technology, or simply the devices themselves wouldn't support Uyghur script, which is written in Arabic. But everyone could speak, and so young people to old people were all using these devices. It also, using WeChat helped them find jobs in the city, helped them organize themselves in communities in the city, but it also helped them think about themselves as global citizens in the Muslim world. Many Uyghurs at that time, 2013 and 14, were part of WeChat groups that were focused on studying the Quran, or sort of normative Muslim practices. What does it mean to be a Muslim today? How is our Islamic practice similar or different from others in other places in the world? Prior to this, Uyghurs couldn't really study Islam on their own. They could go to the mosque, which are controlled by the government, but they weren't permitted to study Islam in private or in madrasas. For the most part, those had been closed. So the internet allowed them to have this sort of private public space where they could talk about things that before they couldn't. And so at this time, there was a sort of a growth in pious religious practice. Not that people were turning to political forms of Islam in large numbers. They were just simply interested in practicing, a Muslim identity. A lot of the Islamic messages that they were sharing were being shared on their phones, on SD cards, or using Bluetooth technology, an app called Kwaya, which is similar to AirDrop. It lets you share messages without even using the internet, from device to device. And so they would meet in prayer rooms that were the mosques, sometimes in restaurants. This began to change in May 2014, which is when the government declared what they called the People's War on Terror. This was in response to a couple violent incidents that had been carried out by Uyghurs towards Han civilians. In the past, there had been violence in the region, mostly in relation to the police, because of police brutality, because of land seizures. Uyghurs would protest, and then they would be sometimes shot by the police, or they would be detained without real trials. And so people would protest that as well. The state had often talked about those as terrorism, but by any international definition, they don't meet the standard of terrorism. They're simply people protesting injustice. In 2013 and 14, there was several incidents that actually did meet what is internationally recognized as terrorism. And so the state started to crack down on religious practice. But it didn't really just target the people that carried out violence, which was maybe a few hundred people. Instead, it began to target the entire population. It began to say that all people cannot dress in certain ways. That if you have Islamic symbols on your clothing, or you wear sort of pious veils as a woman, that you're like a pre-terrorist, that you're an extremist. And that's how they started to talk about them. They also began to work with private security firms to begin to crack down on the population. So it was state security in conjunction with private industry. The largest tech firms in China got involved in this, that we're talking about, like Alibaba, Huawei, the names that you've probably heard of. The initial goal of the sort of digital war on terror, something that the Xi administration called, putting a net over the sky, was a kind of enclosure of the Uyghur internet. They wanted to control what people could say online. There's now 1,400 tech firms that are working in this space, trying to do this work. A few of the tools that they've developed are tools to automate the transcription, translation, and assessment of Uyghur speech. So the spoken audio function of WeChat is no longer really available to Uyghurs as a sort of free space. They've also begun projects to automate the detection of Uyghur and Kazakh faces based on the phenotypes of their face, the shapes of their eyes or nose. So it's really a project to automate a kind of racialization or profiling. To operationalize this sort of system, you need to have lots and lots of people to run it, to implement it. And so what we saw in 2016 and 17 was around 90,000 new police were hired. Many of them were low-level police, a kind of police contractors. And then in my work, I think about this as something similar to what a scholar called Lily Irani calls data janitors. These are the people that build AI systems in general. They're often contracted with large tech firms. Many of them are located in the global south, in places like India. And they sit in front of a screen all day and train an algorithm how to recognize objects within an image. That's one of the tasks they might do. What she's showing is that building automated technology requires a lot of labor. In the Xinjiang case, that labor is being carried out by data police, by these low-level officers who really don't have much training in technology or even in policing. They're basically security guards, but they're now tasked with kind of deciding who should be sent to a camp or not. One of the people that was hired at this time was a guy named Byler.is. He's Kazakh. He's now in Kazakhstan, so you can, he has more freedom to speak about what he did. And he was hired in early 2017 to become one of these data police. Initially, he was put to work in a convenience police station, which is what you see pictured here. There's close to 8,000 of these stations, mostly in the Uyghur and Kazakh majority areas, often 200 to 300 meters apart. They're in charge of a grid in a policing system. So within that grid, there's maybe several communities, housing areas, and they're associated with a larger precinct with a police station. There's surveillance hubs, there's checkpoints within that space. Many of the people that are first in the surveillance hub, that convenience police station, where they're watching the screens, and they're going on they go on a patrol, going from camera to camera, looking at different areas within the grid. People that are first in that space, after they perform well there, then they can sometimes be assigned to work in the checkpoints, or sometimes it works in the reverse. They go to the checkpoints first. At the checkpoints, what they're doing is making sure that the Uyghurs and Kazakhs have their face scanned and matched to the image that's on their ID. They're also making sure that the person is carrying their smartphone with them, because as they go through this checkpoint, there's a data door that will match the MAC address of the cell phone to the person who's carrying the ID. And then the last thing that they're doing is they're sorting the population. So they're opening a back gate or a green lane for the people that appear to be Han, because their mandate is not to inconvenience the Han people. The checkpoints are just there for the Muslims. The system itself is supported by a really unprecedented biometric data collection program that's connected to a public health initiative, or that's how it's described, called Physicals for All. This required everyone to have their DNA collected, to give their fingerprints and blood types, but also to record a voice signature by speaking into a microphone, get a unique voice signature for each person. And then also to have their face scanned, or have pictures taken of their face that are really high resolution, and then also have their irises scanned. So they really have a sort of, the government, the Public Security Bureau in Xinjiang has a sort of unprecedented data set to work from, of all of these really symmetrical images that are exactly the same, that have all this high resolution imagery, that allows them to track people as they move through space. So this is one of the devices that I saw when I was there last in 2018, where you scan your ID and then it's matched to your face. This is the registration system at a hotel. In mid-2017, Byler.is, this Kazakh man that I was mentioning earlier, was given a tool that looked like this. It's a digital forensics tool that can be plugged into your smartphone and then can scan through your digital history to see if you've done anything wrong. It's looking for between 50 to 70,000 different markers of religious or political activity. And this evidence was one of the main tools that was used to decide if people should be sent to camps or not, because it was difficult to know for sure if someone is an extremist, because they look really normal, act really normal, they are normal. So you have to find some sort of evidence in order to send people to camps. What the things that would show up in the scans, he said, when you would scan someone's phone was this sort of thing. This person had gone to the mosque regularly, they had worn a hijab if they were a woman, they had a beard, they had contact with people in Muslim majority countries. There's a list of 26 banned countries. They had listened to unauthorized messages, been member of a religious study group. They had studied Arabic or Turkish in the past, or there's more technical kinds of evidence. They had used a VPN, they had used WhatsApp, they had watched TV shows that featured Muslims. All of these things were signs of extremism and could result in the person being detained. And so in 2017, we saw lots and lots of people being detained as untrustworthy, as people that needed to be re-educated because they were sort of pre-criminals or pre-terrorists. There's over 200 camps. Some of these camps, there's probably at least 300. but some of the facilities are detention centers where people are held before they're sent to a formal camp, and some of them are formal prisons. Um, in general, there's lots and lots of these spaces, and probably close to 10% of the Uyghur and Kazakh population have been detained. So that's around 1.5 million people at a minimum. It could be higher than that. It's very clear from looking at the government records that these facilities are not schools. They're not vocational training centers. They're prison spaces. They have zero blank spaces within them. The surveillance is very tight. The guards carry non-lethal weapons. The classroom spaces and the dormitory spaces are cells. They're prison spaces. There's all forms of punishment are being used in these spaces. In some ways, they're actually worse than prisons because people are controlled so tightly. They're being watched by cameras all the time. They're forced to sit on plastic stools for hours and hours at a time while they, watch speeches from the government that are on the TV screens that are up on the walls, or they're reciting Chinese, learning Chinese, or they're singing red songs. They have to sing patriotic songs in order to be fed. In let's see, around August of 2017, Byler.is really encountered what the system is actually doing in the most direct sense. He had, of course, seen people detained. He had, scanned people's phones and realized that this person had to be detained, and then he had seen them being taken away. But he didn't know exactly what it looked like. He knew that the schools had been turned into prisons. That was clear, but he hadn't seen the inside. And so he went one day he was assigned to transfer people from a detention center to a camp. And he saw something very similar to this. People had hoods over their faces when they were actually moved, but he had to put the hoods on them. And he saw that there were really old people, women and men, people as young as 15. And he saw a woman who couldn't walk well because she had an injury from the prison experience. They saw her just drag her onto the bus, and she was screaming while they did this. And he felt for the first time that, well, I think he had felt this before, but he felt it really grabbed him at that point, that he felt as though he had done something terribly wrong by being part of the police, and he wished he could quit. He had wished he could quit before, but this was a moment that really stood out to him. In 2018 and 19, we also started to see in satellite imagery lots of factories being built associated with the camp space. And we also saw government records that said the factories are being built, that they're becoming a carrier of the economy in Xinjiang because so many people were being moved from camps or being sent from villages to work in factories. Many of the people that are working in these factories are working in garment manufacturing. Because cotton is grown in such large quantities in the region, it makes a lot of sense that you would want to do the finished product there. This is also driven by the rising cost of labor in Eastern China. Already jobs are leaving China to go to places like Vietnam or Bangladesh. And now they have this new labor resource in Northwest China. Gulzira Alkan is another woman I interviewed in Kazakhstan in January last year. She was found guilty of watching Turkish TV shows and of traveling to Kazakhstan, having a passport, being under the age of 55, basically being Muslim, being Kazakh. And so she was detained and held for around a year. And then she was released and allowed to work in this factory. She thought she might be free after she was released, but within several days, the local authority said, now you're assigned to work in this factory, which is actually just next door to the camp where she had been held the year before. Inside the factory, there's surveillance. She's watched by the same guards that work in the factory, in the camp. She actually recognized her boss, who is this guy, Wang Xinghua, who had come into the camp and selected her to be a worker in his factory. The factory makes gloves that are mostly sold in Russia and Eastern Europe. In 2018, it generated $6 million in sales. which Wang Xinhua, he's talking to the government TV here, said he was really proud of. And also they had created what he said, like 2,000 jobs for Uyghurs and Kazakhs. And so they are doing really good work. What he doesn't mention in the video is that he's only paying the workers around 300 yuan per month, and that people are held in confinement in a dormitory that's next to the, or nearby the factory. He also doesn't say that people that don't work well in the factory space will be sent back to the camp, that they're using that as a threat to make them work harder. Basically, that they're not paying them much more than what what they can spend in like the company store. So they're not giving them a living wage. It's like 1/6 of a minimum wage in this part of China. So just to conclude, so you can hear from Rahima, what's being produced in this space is not banishment into prisons and ghettos or deportation, which is how, at least in the United States, surveillance systems are often used to target minority people, people that come across the southern border, seek asylum. They're pushed into positions as well. Here, something more is happening, something that goes far beyond that. In this context, there's a partnership between public industry, public funding, and private industry to build a kind of matrix of assessment, removal, and control that uses this sort of janitorial staff, the data police that I call them, to actually implement the system. The system holds the entire population in place, doesn't allow them to move because of all of the checkpoints. And through that, it's producing a class of unfree workers in this re-education labor regime, which is what I refer to it as. So it's a new kind of unfreedom. And if you look at the Convention on Crimes Against Humanity, unfreedom or holding people in place, taking away their freedoms, a kind of slavery, is one of the markers of a crime against humanity. And we see it at a scale, in a system-wide, it's a system-wide approach, which is also a feature of crimes against humanity. At the same time, because the system requires this sort of army of unfree data police, people like Byler.is, and a camp system, it's difficult to see how it could be moved to other places, or at least moved in the same way. Parts of the system could go to other places, but you need a lot of work. You need camps and all of the same things that they have in Xinjiang in order to actually implement in other places. So I'll leave it there. Happy to take questions after we hear from Rahima.
All right, thank you, Darren. Now, Rahima, if you would like to start talking about your portion of the talk, I'm kind of fading to.
Thank you, Darren, for that very detailed information about the technology, how they're using this technology. I lived in Gulja in the north of what I call East Turkestan. I left my country in 2000 after 1997, the February 5th massacre. Since I came to the UK from 2000 up until now, I was unable to go home. And the last time I spoke to my brother was January 2017. So soon after Chen Quanguo took power in my country, August 2017, and for about I think it was from October, I couldn't get through to anyone. And that was a time I learned that they are cracking down even harder, because we know from 2009, the Urumqi July 5th incident or massacre, they started implementing or installing the mass cameras everywhere, including the public toilets, outside public toilets, and masks, and everywhere, no blind spots. So the system is call it 21st century police state. The whole area, the Uyghur region, is turned into 21st century police state. It's combination of manpower and technology. So the system designed for a very, very explicit purpose is to target Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims, treating them as suspect from the start, and defining a suspicious behavior, including peaceful religious activities. Even donating money to a mosque, it was also criminalized. And Wang Penda, an engineer who works for the China Electronic Technology Corporation, and he said in an official blog post, treating a city like a battlefield, the platform was designed to apply the idea of military cyber system to civilian public security. So I worked with Robin Barnwell, his documentary film Undercover, China's Digital Gulag. And I learned a lot through interviewing some high-tech engineers about how this technology, they're using the technology and targeting, arresting people. So as Darren earlier said, in order to arrest someone, they need to find some kind of excuses. So this integrated joint platform system, I hoped Darren would talk about it. And he might talk during question time. So it's a collect data, and that is connected to the Public Security Bureau. So when Uyghurs go out from the house, wherever they go, every movement, the cameras and checkpoints, whether supermarkets, even if they go walk through a street and passing a mosque, how many times that they pass that mosque, or some of the suspicious areas that the people didn't know and they went there, or the camera picked up that data, that automatically turned their ID, the computer continuously basically as like selecting their suspicious person, dangerous person, and normal person. So that suspicious is yellow color, dangerous is red color, and normal is green color. So apparently every day the computer pop out the names, and the red color names is that then police can immediately go to arrest these people. And yellow is suspicious, so the police, sometimes they call their police the jurisdiction, and then ask whether if they are keeping eye on this person. Otherwise, they will just summon them, and then they just take them away. And this high-tech engineer, and he said, I know how it works, so I was very, very careful. But in the end, even I was caught. I didn't understand how my ID, when I swiped my ID, they said it shows yellow, you're suspicious, we need to investigate you because of that. So he was detained for 3 months, and the ordeal during that 3 months, he wasn't taken to a so-called re-education camp, but it was in a detention center. And they said that detention center specifically were the people that he was with, mostly very high intellectuals, scholars, doctors, engineers like himself. And he said the people not really talking much about the detention, how terrible it is that I was locked up in this 60 square meter cell with more than 60 people, and tortured daily. And one of the worst things that happened to me, according to him, he said that we have to take off our clothes, and then we have to walk around the camera in a circle. and that was is one of the form of tortures, because it said it's impossible for you to feel comfortable when you have 60 people and watching you, and they deliberately doing so many unbelievable sort of things, forcing them. And then many people were taken to camps, and some were sentenced to prison from that place. And also working as interpreter, translator, I met almost all the survivors, camp survivors. Their account of what is happening inside is really, really unspeakable. Torture, widespread rape, forced sterilization, and overcrowding, and forced pills and injections, etc. So at the moment, this system is designed to target the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims. So to arrest these people, as many as possible. And in order to arrest them, that they needed to find some kind of excuses. So this was the one of the solutions for that. And Chen Quanguo said, it's okay to arrest 1,000 by mistake in order to not let one slip away. And also the facial recognition system. And according to this high-tech engineer who actually involved in this technology, he said Uyghurs with high nose, hairy eyebrows and eyelashes, beard. But of course, at the moment, I mean, they don't grow beard anymore. And the typical Uyghur facial figure alert the system with great importance. So this is criminalizing the people from their looks as well. So that when you are passing through a facial recognition camera, if you are nervous, if you become nervous, and the camera also alert the police that you are nervous, you are suspicious. So I can tell you quite a lot about how this is happening, but I think my time is up. Maybe it's better I leave it to questions. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to explain to you and tell you about what is happening to my people.
Thank you, Rahima, for your poignant stories. So before we start with the questions, Darren, I was just wondering if you would like to elaborate a little bit on the high-tech system that Rahima mentioned during her section of the talk.
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. She mentioned the Integrated Joint Operations Platform, which is the system that is region-wide, that all communities across Xinjiang are a part of. It's a system that's serviced by the company she mentioned, the China Electronics Technology Company, which is actually contracted with the Chinese military. It's a state-owned enterprise. And it's the parent company of Hikvision, or HIK Vision, which is the world's largest surveillance camera company. And Britain definitely has lots of those cameras that are in operation right now. So it's a global company. What the Integrated Joint Operations Platform does is it collects data, like Rahima mentioned, from a whole range of different sources, from looking at people's electricity use, their travel in their cars. There's GPS units that are in their cars, and also their movement through space. As you go from checkpoint to checkpoint, it's giving a timestamp to the system to locate you. Basically, what it does, it allows the government or the people watching you, responsible for you, to Google you at any time to find out where you are in time and space. So it has that sort of real-time policing function of monitoring you. It also is used to assess and decide if people should be detained. One of the things that I'm seeing in government documents from the policing documents that have been recovered from Urumqi that will be published later this month is that the relatives of the detainees, the people that have been sent to camps or been sent to prison, that they are on watch lists. They're kind of they're called the special group or targeted population. And as if they go through a checkpoint, like there's an alert that sounds often. They are the ones that receive that yellow warning sign in many cases. So that they are on a kind of monitored list all the time, and everywhere they move in space, they have to ask permission in order to move. People that live in one area of the city have to ask permission to go to another area of the city, especially if they're on those watch lists. And what we're talking about is, the relatives of over 1.5 million people. So the watch lists are really large. Like, we don't know for sure, but it could be 4, 5, 6 million people are on these watch lists. That means that you have to have a really have a lot of storage space to store all that data. You need a lot of policing to implement the system. You need lots and lots of cameras, and all of those things are in operation already. I think there's some aspects of the system that are probably not fully operationalized yet. Like it does still take a lot of people at the checkpoints making sure that the scans are working and all of that. They're kind of working out the bugs of the system. So it's not as though it's like a sort of an orb or something that's like deciding everything. There's a lot of people that are putting in data into the system, but it does have a lot of capacity. One of the things that Byler.is told me was that he saw so many of his coworkers that were detained and sent to camps because of what he called like small mistakes. Like, for instance, one of his coworkers was working in the camp and gave a Uyghur detainee a cigarette, and he was detained like almost instantaneously. He thought it wouldn't be a big deal. Like, someone asked for a cigarette, and why not, be a little bit humane? But he did it in front of the camera, and so he was taken right away. Another person picked up a note that said, I'm innocent. Something like to those effects. And he didn't report it right away. He was detained right away as well. So the cameras are seeing these things in real time. And it's not clear if it's just because people are watching the cameras or if the system itself is detecting some sort of aberration, and then there's an assessment that happens after the fact. But there's a lot of surveillance.
Right. Thank you, Darren. So now I would like to open the floor to questions. So if you have any question that you would like to ask in person, so you can like talk, or not in person, sorry, we're online, obviously. If you would like to ask face to face with the speakers, you may switch on your camera after raising your hand and being granted permission by the host. Or otherwise, if you don't want to show your face due to the recording, then you may send the question into the chat, and I'm happy to ask a question on your behalf. So while we wait for people to start raising hands, I have a few questions in the chat already. So here's a question I think probably best answered by Rahima. So one of our participants was wondering about how a lot of the media outlets, and including your own campaign that's happening recently, have been calling this act against fundamental human rights a genocide. And they were just wondering that, just according from their understanding, a genocide has 3 defining characteristics. It's aiming to get rid of an ethnic group. It must be done in a systematic way. And third point, it must be done through means of killing. And while this participant acknowledged all the horrific, outrageous actions done by the CCP, they were wondering, since that killing is not the dominant method throughout this whole crisis is the term ethnic cleansing um, a more appropriate term than genocide, since the third criteria of the definition of genocide is not met in this situation. So, Rahima, do you have any comments in that regard?
Well, of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you from the Chinese highly classified documents, this is what it says: you can't uproot all the weeds hidden among the crops in the field one by one. You need to spray chemical to kill them all. And this is not made up. This is what it said. And also in that classified document, China's own official document, it says, break their lineage, break their roots, break their connection. So the aim is very the intention. The intention also genocide. Also look at the intention. What the state intention? The intention is very clear. They treat Uyghurs like a malignant cancer, and also calling Islam a mental disease. And what is happening from these accounts of the survivors, that torture, mass rape, killing from Mikrugul, one of the survivors, and when she gave evidence, her testimony, she said during her time in detention, she saw 9 deaths. And all the survivors mentioned about some female or the male detainees, says that there were some people taken out for torture or questioning and never returned, disappeared. At the moment, China's government completely blocked the information. No one can go there to find out what is happening. As far as we know, that up to 3 million Uyghurs and other Muslims are detained in these camps. We also know there were times that they stopped selling tickets, train tickets, for over a month. And we know that was a time they were transferring Uyghur detainees to mainland China, notorious prisons. And Bitter Winter reported possibly up to 500,000 Uyghurs and other Muslims transported to these places. We don't know what happened to them, whether they've been killed or they're still alive. And also, every detainees that I met, ex-detainees that I met, they all suffer from illness, psychological, and heart problems because of what they have witnessed, what they have been through, the torture, and also these forced sterilization and injections. They were told that they must have these injections. They call it vaccine. And it is causing a lot of problems, health problems. It's under investigation. Also forcibly removing children from their parents. And we know up to 1 million Uyghur children are placed in state-run orphanages. They are completely detached from their own culture, own language. They cannot speak the language. Basically, they try to re-engineer the whole Uyghur population into Han. And this is, to us, in my opinion, it is a genocide. If you remove me, the part of me who is Uyghur, I'm become someone completely different. And although you don't kill me physically, but you killed my soul. And this is also, I believe, one of the convention reasons. Also, specifically, I think what is more relevant is the forced sterilization, forced birth control, and removing children from forcibly removing children. These are the kind of evidence that they are looking at. At the moment, mass killing, we don't have any information. We know that people are dying inside camps. If Darren want to add maybe you can.
Sure, I can add something really quickly so we can get to other questions. I think the legal definition of genocide does not necessarily include killing. That is one of the forms of genocide, but there's also other forms of genocide, kind of cultural genocide, where the person is, and the cultural system that that person identifies with is being eliminated and replaced with something else. That is also a form of genocide. I think most people, like the questioner noted, think about genocide as mass killing and intentional killing. And so that's why I think some people see that there's some question around this. I think crimes against humanity is a broader definition, something that includes genocide, but it has more breadth to it. And this very clearly meets all standards for crimes against humanity. So at a minimum, we can talk about that. Like Rahima said, there are people that die in the camps. That's very clear. It seems as though they often die from neglect or from malnourishment, from being beaten in interrogation. So it's not always clear that there's intent there to, kill the people. But it's also very clear that they don't care if people die. And in a number of cases, we've seen crematoria built next to camps where bodies are disposed of, presumably. The state talks about this as kind of standardization of funeral practices, but it raises a lot of questions. So it's very clear that something very horrific is happening. The people that are detained are primarily, adults between the ages of 18 and 55. They're the parents of children. That they're trying to tear apart the society. That's clear. And I think they're thinking that this is a sort of long-term, sort of slow genocide, or what in Chinese discourse they call an ethnic extinction is what they're looking for. Like that's actually in the official government discourse, talking about ethnic extinction as a natural end to development in the region. They're thinking that the next generation of Uyghurs will be fully assimilated into the Chinese population. And so in that sense, Uyghurness as we know it today will be eliminated.
All right, thanks. Also, I see Eve has been texting quite a bit in the chat regarding this. Is there anything you would like to add, Eve?
Hello, hi. Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it was covered very well just now, but there is a very, very specific legal definition to genocide that goes beyond and further than just murder. And the fact that people are being mass sterilized, it speaks to an attempt to wipe out an entire ethnic group, which is the real definition of genocide, what we're aiming towards getting. And I think in the questions in the chat, I can see a lot of people asking, what do we want the UN to do about it effectively? Well, the UN can't really do anything about it because China has veto powers at the UN. And they will not let anything happen. So what we would like to happen is, sorry, someone just walked in. What we want is we want to give the UK courts the power to be able to determine genocide. There was actually, as some people may have noticed, a vote yesterday on this in the House of Commons. It was not successful, but we'll try again. If the UK courts have the power to determine genocide, then we as a country will be compelled to take this much more seriously. I would also just quickly like to say, just a little plug, that I'm currently heading up Students for Uyghurs. And if anybody would like to get involved or help out, we're trying to expand and we're looking for student ambassadors. So please get in touch. I can put my email in the chat box. So that would be really helpful. Fantastic. So thank you.
Cool, thanks. All right, I have a few more questions in chat, so I'm just gonna go through them one by one. So here's a question, I think best for Darren. Is there any danger of the tech companies that enable so much of the biometrics and technocratic oppression, looking to sell their experts and their technology elsewhere. And this is similar maybe to how Amazon sells their union busting workshops. Darren?
That's an interesting analogy. Sure, yeah, a lot of this technology is already going to other places. There's around over 100 countries and other outside of China that have purchased surveillance systems that are built by Chinese companies. Typically, they're not at the same scale and density. Well, they're not even typically. There is no other scale and density that's at the same level as what's in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is at the limit of where surveillance density is in the world. But they are having some similar effects. Right now, my current research is focused on Malaysia, on Kuala Lumpur, and the way that a company that's based in Xinjiang or has done a lot of work in Xinjiang and is partnered with another major camera manufacturer called Dahua, which is probably also in the UK. The way that they are using face recognition cameras at mosques and high traffic areas in Kuala Lumpur to look for people that are on watch lists. And so they're basically using a Chinese data set of over 1 billion images, several billion, that's combing through the population looking for potential terrorists. And so you can see that, you know, people that are undocumented in that space are have to avoid those high traffic areas. And Malaysia has one of the largest populations of refugees from Myanmar and some Uyghurs as well. So that means that there's parts of the city that are no longer safe for them. So typically what happens when these technologies go to other places, it produces these kinds of banishment or pushing, you know, people that are in vulnerable positions into marginal spaces, into kind of a gray zone of the city. You know, London has also lots and lots of cameras. They're using face recognition too. It's not, I don't think, run by Chinese companies in the same way, the same Chinese companies I'm talking about, but it's having some similar effects. So what I argue in my work, and I partner with other scholars that are looking at similar systems, is that we need to have global regulation of these kinds of technology, that we need to protect vulnerable populations who are harmed disproportionately by these forms of technology, especially around face recognition. So I'll leave it there.
Right, thank you. We'll have a somewhat related question. I think you mostly have already answered, but I'm gonna read it out, and if you think there's anything you would add on top of what you've just said, then please feel free. So the question is, do you foresee this technology somehow becoming mainstream and more widely used in our Western world? Certainly not for the same purpose, but for similar data gathering intents.
I think unless we push back against it, yes, that is what's going to happen. One of the companies that I study in Xinjiang is another company is called Megvii, MEGVII, which stands for Megavision. That got its start in Seattle, really. That has partnered with Microsoft for a long time. And one of the things that they did before they got involved in sort of state surveillance and policing and counterterrorism is they helped a phone company to develop the personal recognition system for that camera. You know, that you have on some iPhones have this as well, where it recognizes your face to unlock your camera. That's collecting data from you like all the time. It's getting a really, really comprehensive portrait of your face. And so if that is then given to governments, you know, you can be tracked everywhere you go. So it's ubiquitous in a lot of ways. What we need to have now is we need to have regulation. We need to have some sort of international body that will regulate this kinds of technology. And we'll do it on a country and company neutral basis. Most of us that have citizenship protections are not actually harmed in a very strong way. And so we don't see this as like an urgent issue. But people that are refugees, that are in vulnerable positions like the Uyghurs, they are harmed very directly. And so we need to think from their position as well. You know, who's being harmed by this technology?
Right, thank you. The next question, I think it probably came from after we explained that the EU is not, the UN is not really in a place to actually do anything. The person wonders if what would you like to see, for example, the EU to do in order to improve the situation for the Uyghurs? Rahima, would you like to take this one?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for asking this question. Actually, we're asking the same thing from the UK as well. We feel that the US is leading on this, already sanctioned. Targeted sanction is very important, we believe. Not just, we're not even asking just sanction China, it's a targeted sanction. The companies and the officials who are involved in this oppression, for example, the party secretary Chen Quanguo, the second top man Zhu Hailun, etc. U.S. has already sanctioned many people, and also entities like Xinjiang Production Corporation, COPS, for example. They own almost all the camps, and they are behind all this forced labor. They run the forced labor programs. So also the Public Security Bureau, for example. Basically, I think if the world can, especially the free world, EU, the UK, can join the US, sanction, blacklisting these people and the companies and the high-tech companies, especially, that if you Google it, you can find the list of the companies that US has already blacklisted, and like Huawei, for example. So that can make difference as well, and especially also tackle this forced labor. And it is unfortunate that EU signed a deal with China recently, and we are actually campaigning against that. So if you are living in other European countries, maybe you can visit our Stop Uyghur Genocide websites and World Uyghur Congress, and contact us, that we can tell you maybe how you can help us. Practical way. Contact your own MP or your local politician, and to bring their attention about what is happening to Uyghur people, and etc. So this is not just because for politicians to make any kind of decision, the pressure has to come from people. So grassroots level of movement is very important. And for that, we need to help to raise awareness. Raising awareness, and then contacting your politicians, and also try to change your shopping habits. Make sure that you are not buying any goods that's made from forced labor. I fully understand it is very difficult to identify whether it is made from forced labor, but I would say, if you really care, maybe boycott Chinese goods as best as you can. If you can find an alternative, that is one way of showing solidarity to the Uyghur people.
Right, thanks. We had another question asking about a similar thing, but from the US context. And they mentioned that there is a call for breaking up the big tech, but could that do anything?
Could breaking up big tech do anything? So it's breaking up big tech in the US. I don't know if that would have that much effect directly on this, though I think it could. I think there has to be more regulation, especially around this surveillance stuff. And there has to be more citizen protections. In Europe and the UK, you have some citizen protections, privacy protections in place already. We don't even have those in the US. So we need those sorts of things for sure. but in terms of how we apply pressure on this issue in relation to Xinjiang, I think what we need is an assessment of tools that are being developed, like purposefully being developed to harm individuals, to control individuals, to automate forms of racialization. A lot of the discussion in the U.S. and Europe around bias in technology is like the surveillance isn't good enough. It doesn't recognize like black and brown faces as well as white faces, and so we need to like correct for that. I don't think we need more surveillance or better surveillance. We need less of it, because surveillance is about controlling people, and there is some security benefits, and like we can see with COVID response that tracking the pandemic is useful, and like some countries have used that in certain ways, but they have like very limited domains, and there should be really well-established protections around them. And even in COVID response, we've seen that hasn't always been the case. In Singapore now, they're saying that the data that was used to track people, when it comes to the pandemic, can now be used in criminal cases. So it's like you can see that there's slippage. We need to have a lot more regulation around these things, and that would take political will. It would take organizing. I think that the new administration that's coming into power now is just been inaugurated today in the U.S., that they're going to take this quite seriously at a bunch of different levels. I'm really encouraged that the deputy to the ambassador to the UN is someone who's a China expert, someone who really understands the issues when it comes to Uyghurs, and I think is going to make that front and center in the US presence in the UN, and will take them back into the UN Human Rights Council. So hopefully there will be more organizing there. And I think what we need to see is just more solidarity on this issue all around. And I think in the UK and in Canada, we're going to see declarations of this being a genocide, that sort of determination in going forward. And I think, things like relocating the Olympics, which are scheduled to be held in Beijing in 2022, like that's something that many people could rally around. And that sort of action is important, because if there's going to be change on this issue, it really is going to have to come from inside China. It's going to have to be communicated to the sort of mainstream population in China. They need to understand the moral costs of what's going on. So far, I don't think that that's gone through. So we need to continue to raise awareness on this issue. We need to take it mainstream.
Yes, speaking about the Winter Olympic 2022, we will be launching a genocide game campaign. So just follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and also check on Stop Uyghur Genocide website. And if anyone wants to do anything further, not just understand what is going on, but take some actions, and please join our campaigns and help us to spread the word and raising awareness and many other things.
Cool. Thanks. Here's another question for Darren. Are most of the people who engage within your research area no longer in the Xinjiang region? And the man you mentioned who is now in Kazakhstan, is there any risk of extradition from there?
Well, it's very difficult to go to Xinjiang and do research any longer. The last time I was there was in 2018. But even at that point, it was hard to interview people because of the surveillance systems. I didn't want to get my contacts in trouble, so I didn't contact them. I did like meet some people sort of in ways that were unplanned on their part, at least. So I knew where they worked, and so I could like go there as a customer and talk to them, just very briefly, basically, as a customer. Or I could talk to people in taxis. I could talk to people in parks that were far from cameras, when it was clear that I wasn't being followed. But it's, sort of the conversations you can have to be pretty quick. And it's not a good environment for doing sort of long-term field work as an anthropologist. So what I found is that people that are coming across the border into Kazakhstan, and it's mostly Kazakhs that are able to do that, they can speak much more freely and have much more protections. Kazakhs themselves in Kazakhstan, people that are ethnically Kazakh but were born in China and have Chinese citizenship, they're protected by the Kazakhstani government for the most part. There's been no extradition of Kazakhs back to China. Uyghurs, on the other hand, that are in Kazakhstan are a lot less secure because Kazakhstan has an extradition agreement with China that people that China says are on a watch list or that have committed some crime, they can be sent back. Although I think at this point, Kazakhstan wouldn't do that either. Because Kazakhstan is really appalled, I think, by what's happening in Xinjiang. They maybe don't say that as openly as they could, but that's because there's a really strong trade imbalance. They're dependent on China for trade. So most of the people that I'm meeting in Kazakhstan are protected to some extent, although they do get pressure from the Kazakhstani government to not talk so openly, to not organize. They don't want to see like a sort of grassroots organizing, but they're willing to speak. It does mean that that the evidence we can get from personal accounts is a little bit at a distance. But when you can talk to people for hours and hours and hours, and they can speak in such detailed ways about the things that they went through, and then you can verify that by looking at government documents, by looking at satellite imagery, by sometimes corroborating with other detainees that were held in the same facility, then you can really start to build evidence around these things. And I have no doubt at all that what we're talking about is really happening. The evidence is actually overwhelming at this point. There's thousands and thousands of people that have testified about their immediate relatives that have been detained, and there's several hundred or so former detainees that have talked about what they went through in different locations throughout the region. So we have a really good sample, really good evidence that this is ongoing. There's still a lot more work to do. And of course, the Chinese government is actively trying to hide what they're doing. And the companies that are doing this work are also scrubbing their websites and denying it up and down that they've ever been involved. But if you read Chinese and you kind of know what you're looking for, you can still find lots of evidence on Chinese open sources and then through leaked documents, because lots of documents are coming out that are being leaked by people as well. So there's lots of evidence that's out there, and just more work to do to really show in the fullest detail what's going on the ground.
Right. Thank you. So there's one last question coming sort of from me, but also from one other participants. So basically, we know that what's happening to the Uyghurs right now, this is only sort of the beginning, and China is not just targeting the Uyghurs, but many other Muslim groups. So one of the other large Uyghur, the Muslim minority groups in China is the Hui people. And unlike the Uyghurs, they're not really as concentrated in just one state as the Uyghurs are. Instead, they're sort of spread out throughout the country. However, there are certain provinces in China that have larger concentrations of Hui people than others, and there are large mosques built for the Hui people to practice their religion. However, so like I have read this in many news outlets recently that the local governments have been demolishing or renovating some of the mosques to modify the structure to less resemble a Muslim architecture, but more like a traditional Chinese architecture. And some of them are just straight up taken down. And many places have banned halal restaurants. And so we can clearly see that this, like, whatever China is planning for just the Uyghur people is now extending to like many other Muslim minorities in China. So the question we have is, are there any other surveillance systems being implemented in other regions of China where there are higher concentrations of either Turkic or Hui Muslim minorities?
Okay. I left my country, or I left China in 2000. My work mainly focused on my country, what is happening there. But through when we interviewed these high-tech engineers, um, when we were making this documentary, and they said it is this technology and this surveillance control system is not going to just remain in East Turkestan or Uyghur region. This is like a testing ground, because in the end, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, won't have the complete control. So that the state stability is so important that they always fear that people will rise up when they are not happy. And therefore, these kind of technologies will be definitely used in other parts of the country as well. And so social credit system already is I mean, quite a worrying system as well. And if coupled with the same kind of technology in order to try to catch the dissidents, the people are not, speak the same language as the Chinese. And I do fear for the Hui Muslims as well, because the Islam is already deemed as an evil religion or malignant cancer, etc. And therefore, I did also read some articles last year about Gansu and province, for example, because it's a very heavy Hui populated regions. And also I had some friends posting articles about how they are also targeting the mosques and imams in certain areas. So yes, this is not just the Muslims. Actually, the Christians, house church, and all that targeted as well. So this regime itself is not. I mean, of course, Tibetans and Uyghurs and Mongolians, because we are very different ethnicity, different culture, different language, we are targeted far more severely. But the Chinese people, they are not safe. And that's why I think people should know this is not just the Uyghur issue. This is an issue of, it will affect all people in China. And it will also affect the people in the neighboring countries and the countries who they dependent on China's investment.
I can speak to that a little bit as well. So in the Uyghur region, in the northern part in particular, there is a significant Hui population, around 1 million Hui people who live in Xinjiang, or they call Xinjiang is on their ID card as their registration. And those people are also affected by the camp system. Many Hui people have been sent to camps, especially where there's not many Uyghurs. And maybe even not that many Kazakhs in that area, then they will target the Hui. Because every locality is supposed to have a certain number of people that they are re-educating. Like they need to show that they are taking the policies really seriously. And so they're actually kind of competing against each other to show like how invested they are in this system. And so some of the people I've interviewed are Hui, and talk about that experience. Outside of the Uyghur region, in places like Ningxia or Gansu, there is tighter and tighter restrictions on Islam and on Christianity. Those faiths are seen as, or described by the Xi administration as foreign, as not like domestic to China. Whereas I guess Buddhism is seen as domestic, even though also Buddhism comes from India, not from China, but it's seen as like part of China now. So these foreign religions are seen as potentially a threat, that like you could first identify as Muslim or Christian before Chinese, and so therefore like it's a threat to the sovereignty of the government. or the state, and to sort of your allegiance or your patriotism. So what we see in places like Ningxia or Gansu is that some forms of Islamic practice that are perhaps a little bit more influenced by global piety movements that have more connection to Islamic practice outside of China, they are being targeted. So like, for instance, in Beijing, the markers on Hui restaurants that said halal in Arabic script have been scrubbed. They've been taken off. And so you can no longer talk about halal using the word halal. You can only use the Chinese word, which is qingjian. So like they say it has to, like, Islam has to be practiced in a Chinese way. It's not clear, how much the surveillance is going to be used in those other communities, but I have already seen that the forensics tools, the ones that you can plug into a person's phone, those are also already being used by police departments in other parts of China, in Hui majority areas. And so they can scan someone's phone to see if this person has any extremist thoughts and stuff. I don't think, though, that it's as widespread. Like, they haven't hired 90,000 police officers in Gansu, and they haven't started tracking everyone's phone. They haven't, like in Xinjiang, everyone's phone is scanned. Like, people have their phone scanned 10 times or more. It happens over and over and over again. Every citizen, but particularly Uyghurs and other Muslims. In other provinces, I don't think that they are scanning people at the same level. And I don't know if people would put up with it, or like there would be some pushback from people that are in protected positions by Han people in other places in China. So I think those are some of the roadblocks to actually implementing the kind of surveillance state that they have in China, or in Xinjiang. That's not to say that certain aspects of the system will not become widespread. I think Rahima is right that the social credit system is lending itself to that kind of approach. Yeah, so the outlook is not good. But I think that there is ways that people can push back against it, even in China, and I think they will, because they also don't want to be surveilled in these ways.
Right, thank you. I think that's all the time we have. Actually, we already run a bit over our scheduled time. So thank you all for joining us, and huge thanks to our two brilliant speakers. Yeah, thank you so much for all this informative information, and Rahima for all your poignant stories and real life experiences. Right. Well, I hope that people that are here today will use the information they take away and actually try to help in the cause as an ally in the future, and that hopefully soon one day we'll be able to actually see big changes in a positive way for the Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities in Western China. And yeah, thank you all. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for having us. And yeah, don't forget to follow me, follow Darren, and if you want to know more, read more about articles about Uyghurs. Thank you.
Also, Eve.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, Eve is very important.
No, please.
Really important, yeah.
Please get in touch as well if you want to get involved in Students for Uyghurs, because we'd really appreciate it. We'd love that. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Take care. Bye. And Darren, have a good day.